Hey everybody, Don Carr here with another round of What's on Your Pedalboard, and today it's Mitch Gallagher.
Mitch Board 2.0.
Hey, this is the first What's on Your Pedalboard 2.0. This is
That's right. That's right.
You are the first.
And I really have changed, I think, pretty much everything since the first time around.
And the rig too.
Because you'd never want your rig to stay the same for more than a few consecutive minutes.
Man, you know what? That's going to be a little tougher now.
I know, I'm locked in.
Yeah, look at that, man. That's beautiful.
Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects built the board for me and did all this immaculate wiring and everything. And yeah, the hardest part was choosing what I'm going to lock in as the pedals. And I'm not totally locked in. Yeah. We can talk about that a little bit later. There's some flexibility.
Oh, that's nice. Good to know. This board specifically is built for your solo gig, right?
Yeah. So I put an EP out a couple years ago, and I'm working on another record now. Yeah. And it's specifically for me to take out with the band.
Yeah.
And to get the sounds I need for those gigs. So whether it's the cover songs we're doing or my songs that we're doing, it's specifically designed to give me what I need to recreate those tones.
Yeah. And you're the feature, obviously, and the lead instrument most of the time. And so, so all that stuff's really important, and it's specific.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that, it's guitar-based drums, keyboards, and saxophone. So there's plenty of room.
Yeah.
I'm kind of doing some things because I can.
Yeah, why not,
Which is kind of fun,
Hey, you're the boss.
I got to carry it, so as long as I'm happy carrying it, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Man, it sounds so good.
Thank you.
It really, really does.
Okay. So there's some interesting things happening, though.
Yeah, let's talk about this seriously. Okay, so what's our signal flow?
One of the things that Mason does, actually now Vertex is making these, and you can buy them, but there's an interface box that's underneath the shelf. And the interface box gives you the guitar input, the amplifier output, sends and returns, and a couple of special features that are pretty cool as well. So from the guitar, and this is a Gibson Custom Shop CS336 that's going into the interface box, which has a buffer in it. And Mason will come on a little bit later and tell you all about all those technical details. Here's the clean tone. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Right? So almost on the verge of when you hit it hard, it barks.
Right, when you dig in.
Right, and otherwise it's nice and fat and pretty articulate, nice and clean. And so that's just my bass that I build off of then. So the first thing we hit is a TC Electronics sub and up, which is an octave pedal. Gives you an octave down and an octave up. I don't use the octave up, I just use the octave down to fatten up some things on the recordings that I made. There's some layered guitars.
Oh, okay.
And so when we play live, I voice those with the guitar and octaves, and then I put the saxophone in the middle. Just do the arrangement that way, and that gives us the effect of what's on the recording. So it's just an octave effect that I layer in there, and I like to hit that first because, and actually Mason clued me into this, it tracks better when it's early in the signal path, and I also want it before my drive pedals, because if you pitch shift an overdriven tone, you're pitch shifting all the harmonics down, and it gets weird sounding. And so I want to have that pitch shifting happening before I hit any drive or anything else. So that's the first pedal I hit after the interface box is the octave divider. And I use that once or twice a night. It's not something I use all the time. From there, we step next to the TC Helix, which is a phaser, which I use for some rhythm parts. Once again, a few times a night, not something I have on all the time. But what I like about this particular phase pedal is that it has a mix control. And I don't like that really heavy, swoopy, syrupy phase. I just want a little bit of coloration kind of thing, to where it's just bringing a little bit of life and some
little motion.
Yeah, exactly. From there, we go into a new pedal for me, and that's the Neutrino it's a Neutrino V2 from Keeley, which is a envelope filter. So originally I was going to have a wah pedal on here, but I really don't use wah much at all. But I wanted to be able to drop in a little bit of that filter effect for a few solos, and there's some new stuff that I'm writing that uses that effect a little bit. I tried a bunch of different ones, and this one just works well for me. You can dial the gain, so whatever guitar you're using, you can get it to kind of respond the same. And it has a couple of different settings that allow you to change the shape of the wah. And so I've really been enjoying this particular wah pedal. or envelope filter, I should say, not wah
yeah.
pedal, auto wah. We'll call it.
Right. Well, I mean, it works great. It is a great sound.
Yeah, it is really cool. It's nice and clean. So those 3 pedals are once or twice a night kind of thing. Step on them. Color change, exactly, just in the context. And then we get more into the ones that are part of the tone of the actual sound. So if I've got my clean sound, the next thing we hit is a Vertex Steel String Supreme, and that's a 2-sided pedal. So I've got 2 different things going on here. On the steel string side, I'm actually using it to give just a little bit of grit and also to clean up the bottom end a little bit and kind of thin things out. So it just bites a little more and cuts through just a little bit more. The Supreme side, which is the top row of knobs, I'm using more for kind of a fat boost. So dry.
So almost the opposite effect.
Almost the opposite effect, yeah. So here's the dry sound. And here's the Supreme. So it's kind of rounding things out, still adding a little bit of snap.
Yeah.
And there's just a hair of grit. Just a little bit of fur on there when you hit it hard, which I really don't do. I'm just using it to make it a little bit richer sounding.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's happening there. Next up, we go to the Rockett Melody. And Mark Lettieri, this is his signature pedal.
Yeah.
And what I like about it is it's a Rockett overdrive, but it has a 6-band EQ, so you can really dial it in.
Yeah, that's a really powerful EQ on that thing.
Super versatile, right? Really and I'm still figuring it out, actually, how I want to have it set up. But it's a nice, smooth sounding drive as well. So. So it's nice and smooth, but it cuts through. It's got that mid-range. Yep. And of course, you can adjust that with the EQ as well. So it, very versatile.
Yeah, there's a lot of sculpting possibilities with that. Really cool.
Now, the main drive that I use actually is the Dude from Rockett, and that's sort of a Dumble pedal. Yeah. Not quite all the way hardcore Dumble. There's a little bit of compression there and some shaping. But what I like about it is the fat control that lets me kind of round things out.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And then there's the treble control, of course. But just the voicing of it works well for the stuff that I do. Yeah, that's what that's doing.
It's really responsive too, man.
Super dynamic, and I've actually got the gain set pretty low on this. It's not a real, almost a crunchy sound rather than a real heavy. There's more gain with the melody. So more amp-like, and less drive-like is what I'm kind of looking for there.
Between the two is completely different.
Yep, right, which is what I want.
Right.
And of course, you could stack. So we could do the melody and hit the boost in the. Or I guess you could stack the Dude and the melody, but that's kind of over the top. I don't need that much gain for the stuff that I'm doing. Right. But you have the option. Exactly. And one should have options when they're designing a board.
Always good to have options.
So from the Dude pedal, we are going to the volume pedal.
Oh.
And much to the mockery of others of my choice, I'm using a visual volume, which is huge.
Yes.
You hooked me on that, actually. It's your fault.
I love it.
But it's the coolest volume pedal. They don't make them anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's got a great throw, and the beautiful thing is the row of LEDs that show you where the pedal's set. So when you're looking down, you can't really tell where the volume pedal is set, but by watching the LEDs, you can see very clearly. You know exactly where you're at, which I find so useful.
Yeah, I've really come to rely on mine. It's like a family member at this point. I mean, it's bad.
So from there, then we go to the Carbon Copy Deluxe, and that's just set for a nice long delay with a little bit of modulation, and it's. So it's doing that arena rock delay thing that you got to have on your board.
Yeah.
But it also lets me, as we'll see later, create washy things by combining it with some other stuff as well. So.
Right. Well, and that's got tap tempo on it.
Yes.
Which is infinitely useful.
But the Carbon Copy always sits perfectly. It just sits behind whatever you're doing. It doesn't get in the way, and so you can have a lot of delay.
Exactly.
And it doesn't get messy because that's just the way it's voiced. I do like a little modulation on it just to almost chorus things when it's sustaining.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you really don't even hear that much modulation from it. So from there, we go back to the interface box.
Okay.
And now at this point, it comes out of the interface box and goes to the input of the amp. The amp I'm using is a Paul Rivera modded 68 Custom Deluxe Fender.
Yeah.
So it's got the clean channel, which he revoices, increases the headroom, changes a little bit, and it's also got some pole switches for scooping the mids and, and things. And then it's got the second channel with the fat switch and the drive control, which I'm not plugged into right now, but a lot of times I do plug into that because it has a mid-range control.
Right, like the stage 2 sort of thing.
It's a stage 2 mod. It's exactly right. Exactly right. I'm only using basically the preamp from this amplifier. So all those front end pedals are going into the front.
Right.
The Mini Rockett Rivera is just a load on the power amp, so I don't have to have a speaker. Paul modded the mod with a send and return on it. So we're coming out of the send on that and back to the time domain part of the board.
Right, and that's a non-buffered effects loop, right?
It's a non-buffered effects loop.
Actually an insert point.
Yes, actually I had to find pedals that could handle that level. Right. Because it's not at guitar level. It's actually between like line level and guitar level somewhere in there, and not all pedals handled it, and some of them the buffers got kind of weird and things. But these pedals can handle that level just fine without any problems. Yeah. So really, the amp is just a tone generator for me, and I'm really only using the preamp part of it. I'm not using the power amp at all. So you have to have a load. You can't run the speaker out without a speaker or a load connected to it. So the Mini Rockett substitutes for a speaker. That's all it's doing, making the amp think there's something there to play into. So we come out of the send there, back to the return on the interface box, and then it goes into the Strymon Lex, which is a rotary speaker effect. It's just doing that rotary thing, which I love in stereo. Yeah. It's just so rich and so wide. And
and
at
the
so
back end of the amp, too, it's always more,
Yeah, it's fatter sounding, more real, right? So that's also taking the mono send from the amplifier and converting it to stereo.
Oh, okay.
So that has 2 outs that are then feeding into a Strymon Ola, which is their chorus pedal. Yeah. And I've got it set to the multi, which is kind of the tri-stereo chorus type of an effect, you know, really rich. So yeah, that's just that big, rich chorus thing that so lush, so lush.
You play a chord and it's just like.
Yep, it's huge. And there's so much motion to it, but it doesn't make things sound out of tune. Right. It's not so warbly that you run into that. You can save a favorite, so you can have a preset on board, and I've actually got that set to a vibrato setting. I'll turn it on, and you do anyway. That's just a basic vibrato, and honestly, I don't really use it, but it's there if I want it for, again, just a color change at some point or a slightly different kind of rhythm guitar tone or whatever is what's happening there. From the Ola, we come out in stereo, and we go in stereo into the Starlight, which is Universal Audio's delay pedal, and I've got it set to the Deluxe Memory Man setting with some nice modulation, but I've also got it set to the quarter dotted eighth setting, which is stereo, so it ping-pongs back and forth. Right, so I'm really using it more for ambience than I am for like a delay effect. So it's really almost like a reverb.
It adds a lot of dimension in stereo, especially, man.
When you're playing, you don't perceive it as all these repeats so much. Now you can add the carbon copy on top of that. And now it gets even more washy and...
I mean, seriously, very reverb-like. I thought you had the verb on, and I was like, no, wait a minute.
Yeah, and in fact, I use it a lot of times in place of the verb because it's just a little, it's not as washy sounding. For me anyway. I like the rhythmic delay thing a little bit more. But speaking of verb, I have the Universal Audio Golden.
Can't go wrong there.
Killer sounding reverb, just killer. I set it to the plate, and I just set a nice, rich, but fairly short reverb for when I just want, when you're doing more of a... and you don't want so much of a delay kind of thing going on behind it. It's just nice to have that that ambience available. And when you combine that with the Starlight, you get a nice ambience.
Man, it is. It's subtle, but golly, it's rich, man.
Now, the thing with the two universal audio pedals, the Starlight has tap tempo that you can see here, but they have a new app for controlling these pedals or for accessing some of the features. And the feature that is most important to me of that is that you can convert that tap tempo on the Starlight into a second preset. And so I can set that up to be a big washy stereo reverb kind of a thing for ambient type sounds and things. And the same thing on the Golden, that second preset, the second foot switch calls up a second preset. So again, I can have a different reverb sound there, a great big cavernous reverb if I want to work. And I haven't programmed all that yet. I actually just got this board, so I'm still learning my way around it a little bit. But that gives me more possibilities. So I really have effectively 3 delays on the board, right? The carbon copy, the Starlight preset 1, Starlight preset 2, and then I've got 2 reverbs, the Golden preset 1 and preset 2. So there's a lot of versatility there, and with the drives and the other effects and things, I can cover a lot of territory.
You sure can, man. Everything, you know, the other thing, when you start getting to a pedal board this size, it's everything working together.
And that's Mason working his magic to make, I mean, this thing is silent.
Well,
I mean, there's no noise coming from the board, and it's 100%. And again, he'll come on in a minute and talk about all those technical aspects. But that's the beautiful thing, is that there's not hums and buzzes and ground loops and all that stuff going on, which is so cool.
Yeah, definitely. We also got to talk about the 2 technical things. Of course, the Peterson Tuner.
Peterson Tuner, there's a tuner out on the interface box. So that feeds that, so that's always on. Even when the volume pedal is off. Doesn't matter if the volume pedal's off or on or whatever. So you can always kind of instantly look down. Doesn't matter if it's muted or not. It's muted in this case. But and I like that tuner. It's big. I can see it on a dark stage. I can see it on a light stage. And the other thing is the AirTurn. And the AirTurn is a Bluetooth switch. So I connect that to, all my charts are on an iPad Pro. And so I put that on a little stand, and my charts and my set list and everything are there, and I can step through those using the AirTurn. And so rather than have it sitting off the side of the board, I've got it on the board. It's powered, so I don't have to worry about the battery being dead.
You never have to worry about the battery running down.
It's all Bluetooth locked up to the iPad, and I'm ready to go.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too is with it mounted, you know, if you step on it, it may not go sliding
That's
off
exactly
or
right.
something,
And it's on a riser, and Mason will talk about the risers that he has for his boards that lift that up enough so I'm not hitting the knobs on the carbon copy when I step on that. Same thing with the Lex. It's up on a riser so that when I'm on the volume pedal, I'm not hitting it, and I can hit it without moving the volume pedal. Right. So that kind of gets it up to where I need it to be there. So those 2 pieces are on Vertex risers as well, which is cool.
Yeah, nice, man.
So let's see, we come out of the Golden. That's last in the signal path. It goes back to the interface box. Comes out in stereo, and it goes to this Synergy power amp, which is a stereo tube 50-watt power amp. And I looked around to try to find, there aren't a lot of rack mount stereo tube power amps that are just standalone. And this one's so cool because it has like a resonance control for dialing in the bottom end, to give you a nice thick sound, and the presence control, and you have separate volume control over the 2 channels, and separate standby switches for each channel. So you can, if you have a problem, very easy to troubleshoot.
That can be bridged too, right?
Which is a whole other conversation that maybe we should come back to, because the rig's very scalable. Anyway, to complete this signal path, so stereo out into the inputs on the Synergy, and then there's 2 speaker outs from the Synergy go to these 2 Boogie wide body 1x12s, and those are loaded with Electro Voice EVM 12Ls. And one of them, for those who are detail oriented, is actually a new old stock that came out back in the day, and a good friend of mine, who I promised I would not tell who it was, has a little stash of those, and he sent me one and said, try this out. So there's in this one, there is a vintage EVM 12L that's still new. It's a new old stock, so it's a new vintage, and that one is a new EVM 12L. And we were listening to them, and man, they're really close.
They are close.
There's really a little bit of difference in the voicing on the top, but I mean, surprisingly close.
Kind of
which is cool.
And oranges. Yeah, it's great.
Really cool. So yeah, that's this rig that we have here, or this is one configuration of the rig that we can have, because it can scale from, I could run it in mono with just the modded deluxe and one cabinet and the board, and not use the load or any of that stuff, and have a 22-watt little mono compact rig. Or I actually have two 2x12 cabinets that are loaded with Eminence red, white, and blue speakers. And so I could run bigger cabinets, 50 watts a side with the Synergy. I have a 100-watt Fuchs amp, an ODS2, and I could run that as just the tone with the Synergy and 50 watts and 1x12s or 2x12s. Or we could run the ODS2 100 watts with one 2x12 and the Synergy bridge to 100 watts and have a massive stereo thing.
Wow.
But the other thing that actually Mason just showed me this today is by setting this up properly, we can do a wet, dry, wet rig with this, which is so cool. Well, we heard it, right? We were listening to it earlier, and it sounds fantastic. It requires another speaker cabinet. But at that point, I mean, I'm hauling all this gear already, right? So
what's one more speaker
what's one more speaker cabinet?
Whatever.
But it sounds fantastic, and so that's something I may look at doing. I mean, you have to going stereo, going wet, dry, wet, those kind of things. You have to be in the right situation to use those, because it's largely for you as the player, and if you don't have kind of control of the situation.
I was going to say, front of house isn't dealing with it properly, then it's just a mess. It's worse than just an amp. You know? And the other thing we talked about was just like the whole concept of knowing the board. Right? Once you kind of start getting familiar with it, if you can take it into different situations instead of having this board for this and this board for that and this board for that. So you're not constantly going, wait a minute, where was that sound? I think it was there. No, it was there on the last one. It's not here on this one.
Right. And that's a challenge. I mean, when I was playing every night, you get your board and you learn it really well, and you can use switchers and have presets and all those kind of things. But when I'm not doing as many gigs and not out there quite as much, having a board that this has a lot on it, but it's pretty straightforward. And it's pretty easy to manage and pretty easy to control and set up. And so I can just walk into the gig, and I mean, the Helix is the Helix. And, I don't need to worry about what preset I'm on.
It's on off. Basically,
Right. So I've had switcher rigs before. I think that's great. And if you're playing enough to make it worthwhile to set up set lists and all those kind of things in your switcher, brilliant solution. Absolutely love it. But for what I'm doing, this is working great. And there's another aspect to this, and again, Mason will talk about it, but I can actually plug a guest pedal into this very easily and even power it. And so if there is something else I need for a particular gig or whatever, I don't have to tear the board apart. I don't have to redo anything. I can just connect that guest pedal, and it works great to be able to do that.
So Mason really took care of you, is what you're trying to say here.
He was super patient with me, because I changed my mind a million times before I settled on this lineup.
You're so needy, Mitch.
Yeah, I know it, man. I'm a diva. It's true. The other thing is that there's actually, when we designed this board, there was a J-Rockett Blue Note where the SSS is. And so there's enough space between the pedals to be able to drop something different in if I want to try a different drive pedal, or I want to try a different phase shifter or whatever. There's actually room to be able to do that. So even though everything is so neatly wrapped, I can still substitute things in within reason.
Roughly the same size and roughly the same, configuration of where the jacks are and stuff.
Well, actually, it's set up so the cables are long enough so if something has top jacks, you can reach, and so he made sure there's enough slack and enough room there. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty versatile from that standpoint. Man, Mason needs to tell you about the
we got to see all this, man. We got to know what's going on under the hood here. Well, okay, let's just switch you out with Mason and see what's going on. Mason.
Hi.
Hey, wow, it worked.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Hey, man, how you doing?
Doing great.
Great. Good to see you. Fabulous work, by the way.
Thank you.
So you had to deal with Mitch. Whew, that's tough. I mean, I deal with him every day, so I know what it's like. But
a real despot.
Yeah. Now, this is great. Seriously, man, you guys put together a killer pedal board.
Yeah, I think, Mitch and I vetted this really thoroughly. And I mean, these are some great pedals. I mean, even as a pedal manufacturer, I have high standards, but I don't think you could have done much better than this, just in terms of the tones, the quality of the pedals. It really checks all the boxes.
Yeah, and getting all the stuff that he wants, which is, of course, the main thing.
Absolutely.
He's the guy using it. So, wow, where do we start? I mean, first of all, this is your board. This is a Vertex board.
This is a Vertex pedal board. This is our second to largest size board. It is 26 by 14. And it's built to accommodate a wah and a volume pedal, although, as we spoke of, you and Mitch both prefer, you guys have cornered the market on the visual volume pedals and collected all of them. And so it's much wider than an ordinary volume pedal. But in this case, it really wasn't a deficit. It gave us plenty of space to use the Strobo Stomp, to have the Lex, and then having the sub and up first there, it gives us a lot of space. Obviously, With smaller pedals, you can stack them close together.
Sure.
But I think realistically, even though we can redesign pedals to be smaller, we can't redesign the foot. We haven't reinstituted foot binding. So until we do, I like to leave regular amount of space between pedals so you can actually access the foot switches.
Yeah, right. Unless you're wearing like pointy-toed shoes or something and you want to Capizio tap dance or one of those,
well,
you know.
Style over function, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, good point though. We were talking about the risers too.
The risers that we have, they're designed to duplicate the space below them. So then that way, not only do you have places to stash routing boxes or power supplies, or if you have a switcher, you can even put more pedals under there that you don't need access to, but it duplicates that on top. So then that way you are still within sort of the confines of the ordinary pedal board, and you're building up. You know, it's giving that second story. Because if we were to make this on a traditional flat or slanted board, all this would have had to been extended back, and that would have made the pedal board larger, even with the same number of pedals.
Right.
Yeah, so that's cool. And then the other thing about it is, you know, you can lock obviously the top down in place, but if you ever need access to something underneath, you just do the lift. You have access to everything you need. You have your power supplies. We have the Zuma here and the Ojai, two fantastic switch mode power supplies, totally isolated. And then I built Mitch this custom routing box, which has all the buffers and interfaces, sort of the hub of the entire rig where everything plugs in and out of, that he kind of walked you through a little bit in terms of what it does.
Yeah, so you can get the wet, dry, wet in the stereo and the send and return and, you know, and all that.
Yeah, so you just have your sort of ultimate flexibility in terms of what you want to do. And we actually make a version that you can buy right here at Sweetwater, which accommodates all those things. Stereo, mono, wet, dry, 4-cable method. And we had just concepted this pedal board before any of that ever came to fruition. This has been in the making for quite a while, and I do think though it's indicative of what a lot of guitar players go through in terms of trying to figure out how to be good editors and kind of censoring their eyes, because often as guitar players our eyes are bigger than our stomach. And it's always really important. Like, we spent probably almost as much time planning this thing as we did actually building it, because really vetting the products, trying them out, using them in context, you know, it really helped. And, you know, I know that Mitch jokingly said that, you know, he might be changing this up, but I think that actually we did a pretty good job of really vetting every single product on here and making sure that it was really fitting the bill. And I think that that's important, a lesson that any guitar player could really utilize and make use of.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, because again, it gets back to the learning curve too. Unless you want to just constantly be learning a new pedal or screwing around with how it works or how it interacts with the others, it's way more important to go, I know what this is going to do, so when I go for something, it's there. Yeah. So another interesting thing is the individual risers. I see there are two completely different styles of riser.
Yeah. So we have a few different, Mitch kind of went over them. We have one for the Lex. That had to be relatively high because we had to clear the jacks for the volume pedal to be able to fit underneath it. So that is 1 3/4 inches high.
Okay.
And then there's one also, it's much lower profile, where the Peterson is. And that's not so much for access. It was more so that we could route cables underneath it and give us some space. Because risers can be just as useful to raise the height of the foot switches as it can to be able to create extra routing space so that you're not competing or trying to find these really, really small channels to route cables. So we did that for the Strobo Stomp. And then we also have it for the AirTurn, so that he's able to reach over and change pages on sheet music that's on a iPad. Those are all there, and you can purchase these individually. And we have them for pretty much every conceivable size of pedal. And even if you can't get the exact same size, as long as you kind of have the principal part of the pedal on it, it's going to function perfectly well. And you can Velcro that to the bottom and put that on your pedal board. Or if you want to go really hardcore, you can get our pedal board grip tape, which is a really high quality adhesive. And I mean, I couldn't pull one of these guys off here. We could lift up the whole pedal board by one of these pedals. It is so strong.
Wow. Yeah, because you were talking about, what's the tool that you use to actually get pedals
I
off?
use an upholstery crowbar, which is a plastic crowbar, because it doesn't damage the paint, but it allows us to release the pedals. And I understand this is not for everybody. Some of us may have such modular rigs that using ordinary hook and loop style Velcro is going to be just fine. But the trouble that a lot of the pros run into that we're building for is that they don't want to find pedals rolling around the case when they open it at the gig. So this is really imperative. If you know that you're fairly set on the orientation of the pedals or that pedal, I think it's a great thing. And the other cool thing about the power grip is that there's no consequence to using it and swapping it out and having to tear it off, because it doesn't leave any of that adhesive on the pedal board surface that then you're sitting there with some sort of, you know, adhesive
Solvent
remover to
whatever,
try to remove it. It just doesn't do that. Also, it doesn't damage the paint of the pedals. And if you give it about 24 hours to cure, it is like not going to go anywhere unless you want it to go somewhere. And also, I used our Pedalboard Essentials kit to do all of the cable organization here. So that includes about 20 zip ties and 20 tie-down mounts. And I think we went through a few packs here in order to complete the entire pedal board. But that's just how I'm keeping everything nice and neat and organized and bundled. So when you're seeing these looms kind of across the bottom, or if I lift it underneath, you can see additional ones. And that's done for all the power and all the audio. And then we used all of our Vertex signature cables throughout the whole thing. And I customized these, you know, to length for Mitch. And we sell all these cables on the Sweetwater website. But the other cool thing that I should mention for people that are out there that are watching this, you can talk to your sales engineer and say, hey, I need exactly 41.5 inches. We will do it up to the nearest half inch. And it's not any additional charge. You just round it to whatever the nearest 6 inch was, and that would be the price. And you can get these customized with straight plugs, with right angle pancake plugs, or a combination thereof. And you can do it with the DC cables as well, which we used all on Mitch's pedal board. And those are really cool in that they're designed for the voltage of today's pedals. Most of the power cables that come with your ordinary supply, those have been standardized since the mid-90s when the very first isolated supplies came out. So we've got ours optimized for the highest voltage you typically see, which is about 24 volts DC, and for the current needs, which is, you know, at max for most pedals is right around an amp. So this is going to deliver the same voltage as you would measure right off the supply, usually about 9.6, as soon as it meets the pedal. Whereas a lot of the cables that are using kind of thinner DC power cables, sometimes you'll get a little bit of a drop across, and we just want to make sure that we're delivering everything perfectly. There's no noise associated with the DC cables, and that they're going to work great on a pedal board system just like this, or one that you can build at home. And one thing I'll also say to the people at home is, if you're looking at this and you're going, gosh, I don't think I can replicate this neatness, the neatness is really an aesthetic. Because if you're using high quality soldered shielded cables like we're using here with our cables, if you're using a high quality isolated power supply like you do with the Strymon Zuma, and you're using high quality buffers like there is in our buffered patch bay that has all the input and output buffers, that's what I call the holy trinity of tone. If you got those three things happening, it's going to ensure that you got a low noise pedal board that's going to be reliable, and that it is going to sound great night in and night out. It is not going to have any tone suck. And I mean, and Mitch and I were going back and forth to this thing, and it sounds the exact same way with everything in bypass if you're plugging straight into this thing. And that's really the important thing, and that's what we want to get. So you don't need to make it look like this for it to be a great pedal board. It can be a little messier. That's really just a visual thing. If you're doing those things, you can buy this stuff, and it doesn't need to look perfect, and it can sound great. So I just want to make that clear, that they don't all need to look like this in order to be winners. You know?
Right. Yeah, it helps, but you know, not really. It only helps in the organization part of it.
Right, and sometimes it can help with the troubleshooting if you have a little bit easier routing looms and stuff like that. But you know, I think some people maybe get discouraged when they see something really neat, and they think that maybe that is somehow tied to its reliability. And there's other factors, and so that's just the thing we should note for the viewer at home.
Right, like you say, the Holy Trinity is really the key, man.
Yeah, Holy Trinity of tone.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so now we're going to drill down just a little bit farther. The buffers.
Right.
You've got 4 buffers on this?
We actually ended up with 3. The buffers in the patch bay, and it pretty much is indicative of the same buffers that are available in our custom interfaces, which you guys are going to be selling. So it has an input buffer, so that's buffering the guitar right as it comes into the system. 1 meg input impedance, which is matching what's right on the Rivera. So the guitar pickups are reacting the same as though they were plugged in the Rivera. Lowers the output impedance to 100 ohms, so nice low output impedance line driver. That's feeding through all the effects. And then we go in front of the amp with another buffer. So that buffer is feeding out to the front of the amp so that it drives the line back into the input of the Rivera. From there, as Mitch told you, it's converted to line level from the send, and it's loaded down with the Rivera Mini Rock Rec. Right? So that line level signal is coming back into the system, and there's no buffer there. And then it's going through the rest of the stereo effects, and those are going stereo out. Now, there's no buffer there. Those are all at line level, and these pedals all have high-quality buffers in them already, so we don't need to worry about converting it. But where I did add another buffer was on our effects loop send and return audition loop. So there is actually an audition loop that occurs after the volume pedal, but before the carbon copy, which is the last effect before the front of the amp. And the audition loop is basically an insert where Mitch can audition pedals or a pedal de jour between those two pedals. And this is kind of a good spot where it could be modulation, it could be an overdrive pedal, although his volume pedal would be before that, but that's not the end of the world. And it could also be another delay or time-based thing. So I think that that's the most flexible space to add this. And the cool thing is if nothing's plugged into it, everything just normalizes and works normally. But if I insert a pedal into that, then it disrupts that signal path, sends it out to the pedal, and then returns it. So it'd be like volume pedal, external pedal, then carbon copy. So I have a C4 synth here,
Okay.
and I will demonstrate. So from the input, I'll plug it into the send,
Okay.
and from the output, I'll plug it into the return. I also, because pedals these days require power,
Yes, they do.
I put a power loop as well on the side, so the pedal
Because
lights
you're that
right
guy.
up. So the idea here is that not only can you put the pedal in there, you can power it up, you have the stuff to do it, it's all equipped on the board, it has its own individual power supply from the Strymon Zuma 500 milliamps.
Man, that is perfect. Mason, that's awesome, man. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, man. Great stuff. Let's bring Mitch back.
What? I'm back.
Was that rough? I hope not, man.
Man, what a trip.
I try to make it smooth.
It was quite a trip.
Okay, good. Wow, man, there's a lot of stuff going on this board, man.
He thinks this stuff through. He knows all the details. I mean, talk about detail oriented. I mean, you can see that from the cable layout and everything else that's going on here. There's a lot of thought and a lot of effort. Man, you learn so much watching somebody route things and solder them, and the care he takes in putting all that together is really fantastic, man. So
the experience, man, for sure.
Yeah, I feel really privileged to have this board.
And more importantly, it sounds great.
It sounds great. Yeah, like I said, no noise. No reliability issues. Don't have to worry about if the pedals are still going to be stuck to the board when you get to the gig or anything like that. I mean, it's all kind of solid and ready to go, which is so cool because it's one less thing you have to think about.
Yeah, exactly, man. That's what you want. You want to just be able to get up on stage, just do your thing, not have to worry about it, and that is the vehicle right there.
That is the vehicle.
That is it. Yeah, I mean, everything here, you can get at Sweetwater.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. Except the visual volume. But,
right.
but who would want one?
Exactly.
At least that's what
albatross.
who would want that thing?
All right. Well, Mitch, thank you so much, man.
My pleasure,
Seriously,
man.
This is great. This is the first 2.0. What's on your pedal board? I love it.
It's going to start a trend.
Exactly. So just let me know when you're ready for 3, and we'll, and we'll do.
Couple weeks. Yeah, Mason's going to be mad if I tear this apart, man.
Don't do it.
It's got to stay for at least a couple weeks.
Don't do it.
Right on.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about pedals, anything on this board, anything to do with this board, any questions about Mitch, make sure to contact your Sweetwater sales engineer, and they'll set you up.
They have my complete bio.
Thanks, everybody.